Well, I think we can start. Good afternoon to everyone who has joined us for this discussion, which is one of a series of discussion that we are doing as part of the initiative of young generations for the new Balkans toward 2030 towards alternative horizon. Today we'll be talking about something that has been filling both European, regional, and domestic news in the past couple of weeks, and that is the Belgrade-Pristina Dialogue or Kosovo-Serbia Dialogue. And we are asking two extremely good and extremely relevant panelists who are also members of our initiative of young researchers discussing the future of the Western Balkans and discussing the future of the European Union. We'll be basically asking what everyone is asking, and that is, can the agreement between Belgrade and Prishtina or between Kosovo and Serbia be finally reached? And we're going to try to look at from a bit of a different perspective. As I said, we have two extremely good speakers that some of you that following the news could read some of their shorter versions of statements from the Financial Times in the past couple of weeks to Radio Free Europe and other media. But here we have them for 1 hour to discuss in detail what maybe all of us would like to know. This initiative or this event is organized or hosted by the International Institute for Peace from Vienna, but co-organized and co-hosted by two other institutes. The first one is the Austrian Institute for International Relations and the Karl Renner Institute, both institutes in Vienna. My name is Adi Ćerimagić, and I work as an analyst for the European Stability Initiative, but I'm also a member of the advisory board of the International Institute for Peace. And in that capacity, I welcome two of our great speakers. First one is Donika Emini. She's talking to us from Prishtina, and she's executive director of CiviKos platform and a member of very influential and very good network of researchers and experts from the Western Balkans and the EU BIPA group. And our other second panelist is Djordje Bojović, who is speaking to us from Brussels. And he is a fellow at the London School of Economics. We will start. What I was thinking, and I hope that my panelists will follow my lead, is not to start from the dialogue, because I think a lot of news have been reaching both the audience today here, but a lot of things that are behind the dialogue that haven't been discussed in much detail. So I would rather start from there. So my first question for both of you, maybe we start with Donika first, would be: what are the three things that are in focus of domestic politics in Kosovo first, and then in Serbia, that are basically behind all the news that we're reading in short entries on what was happening on the dialogue, that are basically creating the atmosphere in which the dialogue has restarted or has restarted. So I would like you to share three main things. So Donika, let's start with you.
Hi, Adi. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel, to share the panel with Djordje. We have been discussing about this issue. I remember vividly our first launching event was actually about COVID-19 in the Balkans, and we mentioned the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia as, of course, being one of the processes that has impact in also internal function of the countries, but also the entire region. Well, of course, I mean, you are right, Adi. Everything in Kosovo since the beginning of March, instead of dealing with the pandemic, we basically dealt with the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, and everything was it overshadowed all of the important issues in Kosovo, which were more pressing than the dialogue, to be honest. Now, if you want me to narrow down into three, it will be very hard, because everything has been going on for in the time span of 3 months in Kosovo. We somehow made strategic foresight redundant here. It's very hard for researchers to basically foresee what's going to happen, because every day we're having multiple events that have an immense impact in our everyday lives. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic is something that is very worrying, because it is the health crisis and the way it has been dealt after we lifted the measures, which now are back. So we're going back and forth a lot. Lately, the number of infections is increasing highly, and this is something that is worrying for all of us. We are again working from home, and even the public administration is working from home, which makes everything sort of dysfunctional. Of course, economic recovery after COVID-19. I mean, we had the first wave of lockdown, and now we're having the second wave, and we don't know if the second wave is something that we will survive, to be honest. And this is a huge burden also for the current government, which has taken the lead in the middle of the pandemic because of the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And of course, apart from this, we are having, of course, democratic backsliding, which I'm not sure if we can call it backsliding anymore, because we have never been democracies to be backsliding from it. We are kind of just everything that was happening before COVID-19. This situation has amplified all of our problems. And of course, being the EU integration somehow in distance, although the EU has provided a lot of emergency funds, but also has somehow tried to open the perspective for the region with Albania and North Macedonia, but also trying to regain the role in the dialogue. Then again, we are having a lot of problems reforming the country, and this is becoming even hard now that there is no transparency. Our government doesn't have a spokesperson. We simply, it's very hard to get information or attend in meetings because of the COVID-19. It's easier for the institutions to somehow justify their lack of transparency. On top of everything, we do have something that has been very sensitive in Kosovo, which is, of course, what happened with the president and the indictment and the special court, which then triggered another debate, which is related to the KLA, to dealing with the past, to then, of course, has an impact on how we see also our external strategic partners, and having the dialogue somehow going on while our president in Brussels, while President Tadić was questioned in The Hague, kind of sent very mixed messages to the audience here in Kosovo. So this is like just I'm sure that is more than three things that we are dealing with now, and we don't have the capacities to cover it all. It has been constantly, being all over us, and I don't think that the situation with COVID-19 is helping at all in this regard. So this is for the first three issues.
Thanks. No, thank you. Quite interesting, and somehow I suspect that what we will hear from Djordje will in some respects be similar, or at least in similar direction. Djordje, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adi, and thank you to the International Institute for Peace from Vienna for the invitation, and thank you, Donika, also for a very nice introduction where I can actually just jump in and then confirm that lots of things are quite similar in Serbia, or even worse when it comes to COVID. The three things domestically that are currently going on in Serbia for the last month or two, I would first and foremost put the elections. It was highly controversial to have the elections when there was the second peak of the first wave of pandemic, as they call it, but it was highly controversial to have the elections at that point, that early in June, even though the main opposition parties announced the boycott, and nothing was done actually to organize, when the elections were postponed already in March, to organize some sort of dialogue between the ruling SNS party and the main opposition bloc to see if there is a breakthrough in this political deadlock that is currently in Serbia. So I think the main thing with the elections, where the Vučić got a landslide victory, he got 2/3 of votes, and he'll have 180 out of 250 MPs in the Serbian parliament. It's more than a majority needed for the constitutional change. So it's unprecedented since Milosevic times. that Vučić got that much votes, and I think it's also due to the abuse of state resources and everything during the corona pandemic, which leads me to the second thing, which is, of course, and in any country at the moment in the world, which is COVID. But what is specific in Serbia, there was a major manipulation with numbers, possibly, which was revealed by the Beer Network just the day after the election. So on the 22nd of June, we had a major report done by a Balkan Investigative Reporting Network revealing the numbers that are not publicly presented of death and infected persons in Serbia, which was a major actually blow for the health system in Serbia, thinking that we actually know how the state handles the crisis. We had a quite controlled situation as it was officially presented in June, 2 weeks before the election, and then all of a sudden, the week after the elections, we had a sudden rise of numbers, and there we had this affair with the COVID numbers, which also led to the political turmoil in Serbia when Vučić wanted to reinstate the curfews, which were one of the strictest in Europe in March and April. The protesters went out claiming we cannot go back to curfews. And I think that was a major split that has happened early July in Serbia, where all this accumulated frustration that was due to the misconduct of COVID, but also manipulation of numbers and non-possibility in a democratic way to articulate all these different politics. It all erupted on the streets of Belgrade early July, and then we had a quite massive use of force, which we haven't seen for 8 years of SNS. I think this is a major change because there were many protests against Vučić or against SNS, but no one was this violent, this aggressive when it comes to the use of police force. So I think it's also a change that is telling. And then the third one is when it comes to the opposition movement in Serbia, the one who has boycotted the elections, they decided to again call the European Union to try to have some sort of to offer a platform for a dialogue between the ruling parties, the SNS, the Progressives and the Socialists, and the opposition bloc. And there was a letter sent by the opposition parties to the European Parliament, but this time endorsed by 3 out of 4 main groups in the European Parliament, namely the SD, the Liberals and the Greens. So I think that this political push and this political steer that is happening here in Brussels can also, despite the silence of EPP, can bring some change, even though the opposition was not very active when the European Parliament mediators were there in December. I think that now the situation is so fragile politically that the EU needs to step up, and this letter of opposition is a sign in a good direction, I would say. So maybe that will bring a much needed dialogue internally. I don't speak yet about Serbia also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. And maybe your last point is that introduction in my next question, which will be, again, let's still not go into the dialogue and what has happened in the past couple of weeks, but let's stick to issues that surround it. And that would be, what's the European transatlantic global environment in which this has happening? What are the main points that you see that are important to understand in order for us to answer the question we have? If we think about transatlantic relations, if we think about relations within the EU itself, French-German relations, and then if we think about relations with third actors, be it Russia, now UK or China, those sitting in the UN Security Council. I would again start with Donika, if that's okay.
It is very hard to keep it outside of the dialogue because, Kosovo has ousted the government in the middle of the pandemic, and that was because of the strategic partners and what was happening outside of Kosovo, especially this transatlantic sort of crack that we have been witnessing, and not just in relation to Kosovo, it is also on other very important global issues. And it has happened before Trump, it started before Trump, but then of course, Trump has made it very easy for it to become explicit and obvious for all of us. So I will start with something that is really important, and also in relation to the dialogue, but also to the overall reforming of the region and of our countries. And it starts with, I mean, back then we used to have this Western wing and then the Eastern wing, in which West has been promoting democratic values. So it is also linked to the values, democratic values. And now we are being sent mixed messages, because we do have our strategic partners for the region, the US and the EU, basically fighting and fighting openly and explicitly on Twitter. I wake up every morning to see our representatives of the EU covering the Balkans, especially Kosovo, having Twitter feuds with Ambassador Grenell, and that sends very negative messages for us, because we clearly know that not just in the process of the dialogue, but the entire democratization of the region really depends on coordinated and united West and the source of these values, democratic values, that they have been trying to transmit to us traditionally, at least in the past 20 years, was very, very intense. So the first element that I will mention is this transatlantic crack, which is obvious now, in spite of the fact that Grenell basically has given the floor to the EU now with the dialogue, and it's doing it explicitly to also send the political messages saying that you have the floor, but you don't have political power. And this is also in relation to the visa liberalization for Kosovo. The second one is, of course, what is happening between the member states. In our case, it's very important to have a full alignment of France and Germany. I mean, all member states are equally important, and this is to be handled bilaterally by the countries. But when it comes to the EU platform, it is important to have Germany and France on board. And I haven't really seen this lately. I mean, of course, that there is a constant effort of Chancellor Merkel to bring President Macron on board and make him more engaged in the Balkans, also change his approach towards the Balkans. But then you can see that it's really something that is not organically deriving from the countries, but highly pushed by Chancellor Merkel, which is not sustainable, because what will happen when she's not there anymore? Of course, then in the case of the region, I mean, the Balkan region has always been a place in which all global powers have showcased their power. And of course, China and Russia are here. And then this is also, I think, more important for Djordje, because Serbia has been sort of strategically placed in between the East and West. In Kosovo, this is not relevant, but we know that at some point the dialogue will have to be discussed in the circles of the UN Security Council, because the mandate to the EU was given by the UN Security Council, and we will have to face Russia and China. And that's not a simple battle for a small country such as Kosovo. That's why we need this strategic alignment of the West to basically create this window of opportunity at the UN Security Council for this agreement to basically go through, because that will change the 1244 for Kosovo, which then will determine the way that Kosovo is being seen globally, but also in the UN. So I think this is the issues that are more of our concern in the case of Kosovo, is how the non-recognizers will act. And this is not just in relation to the dialogue, but towards Kosovo. Because, I mean, Lajčák constantly mentions the EU perspective, but Kosovo does not have a EU perspective without the 5 non-recognizers, without a compromise not being recognized, probably, but having this compromise that was made with the SAA agreement for Kosovo. So having this, the 5 non-recognizers for Kosovo and the way they react towards the region, and especially Kosovo, makes us feel more comfortable when it comes to the dialogue being facilitated by the EU and the political power of the EU in relation to the dialogue, but also the reforms, because reforms are, highly linked to the EU integration process. I mean, we know that ideally it would be if we internally sort of grow this maturity to understand that we need to reform for our own sake, but this is not happening. So having the EU as an external power to push us towards the reforms and the EU integration sort of card on the table kind of pushes the processes forward for us. So I do believe that this is how we see it from Kosovo's perspective. I don't think we are highly focusing on the member states EU and this relation between the member states, but also the EU-US relations. I think it's too early for us to think about China and Russia, because I think this is something that we will be concerned when the dialogue reaches at some final stage, and we think about creating the circumstances for it to go through.
Yes, thank you very much. Before we move to Djordje, just one point to our viewers via Zoom. You can ask a question if you have in a chat on a platform, and you're more than welcome to ask a question. And for Facebook viewers, I invite you to send me direct message via Facebook if you have any questions for our panelists. Djordje, Donika was talking about this rift in transatlantic relations. But what we have seen, I think, last night is a photo of President Vučić with 5 ambassadors from the Quint, including the US and the EU ambassador. And we have read the message coming from the, I think, State Department on supporting the dialogue. So how is this transatlantic and other relations, as Donika has said, and international context being perceived from Belgrade, I would say?
It has been widely discussed, this rift that has appeared in transatlantic relations. And it's not only Serbia-Kosovo dialogue. I mean, let's be honest, there's a wide range of issues on which nowadays official Washington and official Europe, be it Berlin, Paris, or Brussels, do not agree with. And I think that Serbia-Kosovo dialogue is just one of the issues on the table. But unfortunately for us, somehow the region is always collateral damage when there is not a strategic alliance of the political West. And I think that's what we've been witnessing. And to come back on it, there are some positive sides on that. I mean, I wouldn't say that everything is negative. The US, with its renewed interest in the Balkans, pushed the EU to restart the dialogue and to be more energetic when it comes to the dialogue. And I think that it was the US that appointed not one, but 2 special envoys. It was Matthew Palmer, the State Department's envoy, then Richard Grenell, the White House's envoy, and then only we got the European envoy. Finally, in this geopolitical game, it was the EU that has won this game to restart the dialogue and to have it here in Brussels, which also gives us in the Balkans a sort of sense of predictability and security that the dialogue is going to be more transparent, more accountable, more open for other opinions, and more inclusive overall. So that's something that is on the positive note. But I think that also this game between the EU and the US, which was widely commented not only in Serbia or Kosovo but throughout Europe, was not something that necessarily has brought the negative outcome. But what Donika mentioned about foreign policy shift, that's something that we have seen in Serbia during the COVID, and then it seems to have continued. I mean, the main question for us when Vučić was kissing the Chinese flag when the planes arrived from Beijing with the medical things was how this foreign policy shift is deep. Is it a structural change, or is it just the folklore that we need to present during the pandemic? It seems that the change is a bit more structural than it only appeared on the surface. I think that there is a major shift of Serbia towards China, and we only saw it from the economic perspective, not only Belt and Road Initiative, but also the loans, the highways, all sorts of investments in the last couple of years in Serbia. Now we see it on the foreign policy level, and we see it more and more, and it's not only folkloric like during the pandemic. We saw Serbia's foreign ministry issuing the support for Hong Kong protests and supporting Beijing government. So we haven't seen that, for instance, when during the 2014 episode of Russia and Crimea. Now we see it with Hong Kong and China. I think it's a major thing. There are small things where you actually can grasp what's happening in there, and I think that's something that certainly should not be neglected. And that's something that COVID and this renewed dialogue, I think, also brings, because let's not forget, I think that the dialogue, when it enters, as Donika mentioned, this higher or final political phase, it will necessarily have to include, in order to change 1244, it will necessarily have to include both Russia and China as the veto players in the UN. And I think that besides the 5 non-recognizers at EU level, what one has to take into account are diverging or different interests of these two powers. And I think that Vučić actually uses that card in case the EU dialogue does not finalize, does not end up in a way that he would like. He can always use the trump card and then say, look, we need them on board in order to pass the deal through the UN if one of the desired outcomes is the UN membership for Kosovo. And I think that in all this, that might appear like a minor detail, but it's in practice it's not. And then the last thing, and then I will add on the global perspective, is also the corona consequences in terms of economy. And what we have seen is how significant EU membership is, not only on the case of Croatia, but since Croatia is the closest one in the region, how generous the support is when a country is a member in the EU. And I think that looking realistically, one can always sell what are the benefits of the EU membership yet. What we have seen in Serbia is that actually the money more and more comes from the when SNS took power in 2012 from the Emirates or from China, and then I'm afraid that this miscalculation that Emirates or Chinese investments and grants and money can replace the EU funding can cost us a lot. Thank you.
No, thank you. Let's now move to the dialogue, although we were, of course, already in the dialogue because it's so difficult not to be in dialogue. And our task today in this panel is to try to explain or try to simplify or try to digest everything that has happened in the past 3 weeks, from the DC meeting, White House meeting, to what we have seen in Brussels last week and what we will be seeing in Brussels this week. So Donika, I have a question for you. There's a lot of people talking about the differences in power between two negotiators, Vučić and Hoti, Prime Minister Hoti, and I think you both, Djordje, and you touched upon it in the sense that what we have seen in Serbia is the concentration of power in Vučić, and then the weakness of Prime Minister Hoti was quite discussed, especially on social media, in relation to President Vučić's question, for example, about whether he speaks Serbian language or not, as an example of that. Do you see that as an issue, or do you think that it is that will have an impact on the next steps of the dialogue, or do you see it as something that has been attracted the attention, but in practical terms means little?
Well, when I mentioned domestic issues, I intentionally left the lack of legitimacy of our government for the last part, for the part of the dialogue, because first, it is not Hoti and Vučić. I was always, and I still am, against monopolizing the process. And I, my PhD thesis is about stabilitocracy, and we have advocated constantly to basically make the process inclusive as possible in order to have a healthy negotiations process. What happened in the past 2 years was that the process was highly monopolized by the two presidents and Ambassador Grenell. And for Hoti it was very hard, and it comes to my point that for Hoti it was very hard to basically travel to Washington, D.C. because he wasn't fit for this, this circle or triangle of three people who have been closely discussing. There are a lot of conspiracies what they were discussing about, but at least the fact that Taci is out of the process and the cancellation of the DC meeting happened immediately says a lot about the newcomers in the process and how sort of easy for them is or how hard for them it is to become part of the process halfway through or in the finish line, as was the case in Washington DC. Personally, I'm against monopolizing the process. I'm pro-inclusive processes, but now I don't feel that the EU has legitimate partners to negotiate with. Djordje mentioned the problems in Serbia with the elections, and in Kosovo, the Hoti government looks legal on paper because they have done a lot of political maneuvering with the Constitutional Court to make it look that way. Highly explicitly sidelining with Vendosje in the process and forming the government by the second winning party. But at this point, I don't think it's much about how Hoti and looks in front of Vučić, who is the strong man of the Balkans. Of course, he uses his power to basically, ask an Albanian, do you speak Serbian? Because, this is traditional. We had to learn Serbian in order to survive in Yugoslavia. It wasn't the other way around. So this is sort of sending, and the way Vučić acted was that, I'm sending, political power messages and showcasing that you in this process are smaller than me. The response of Hoti has been criticizing Kosovo a lot on social media, but I think it just showed that Hoti is willing to negotiate. Here's the prime minister who speaks English but also speaks Serbian, who is willing to sit on the table and sort of show that he is progressive to that point, that he wouldn't respond to Vučić's nationalism with another type of nationalism. But Hoti's problem is internally. First, when this government was formed, it wasn't formed to fit into the EU-led dialogue. It was formed to fit into the US-led dialogue. When it was formed with the sponsorship of President Taci, it was formed to basically just fit into Taci's agenda with Vučić and Grenell. So that's why Hoti is not prepared for the dialogue, because initially what they agreed was that Hoti and the government will deal with internal issues such as health crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the economic recovery, whereas Taci would, just take the lead of the dialogue and they would just be supportive of it. And of course, guarantee the implementation of the agreement because the government had to go through with it. And then the game changed halfway through, and then Hoti sort of had to come up with a platform for the dialogue, which is something that needs years to be implemented because it has a lot of assembly in it. And in lack of legitimacy, going to my initial point, is that Hoti does not have it. If Hoti had gone through with an agreement pushed and signed by Taci, of course PDK with it, or at least a big chunk of PDK in the parliament would have adopted it and would have supported it. And now, when the dialogue moved to the EU and Hoti took the lead for real and not just on paper, now the PDK is explicitly against it. If you see what Taci's people are tweeting, they are constantly attacking Hoti and saying that he doesn't have legitimacy to go on with the dialogue, especially when the president is in The Hague and being questioned by the special court. So even if he goes through with the agreement, Hoti will not have support in the parliament because he has the PDK who basically have been sort of explicitly against it. And then Vendosje, which is a party that is in the opposition, but it's also a winning party. And the party that Hoti was engaged personally to oust when they were senior partner in the government. So I don't think Vendosje will actually support it. And Vendosje is weirdly quiet, to be honest. Only like lower level all MPs are talking about it. But, due to the sensitivity of the special court, because back then Vendosje was very much against it. And now there are quietly somehow going through this sensitive period says a lot. They are not going to support, but they are not being as destructive as we expected it, because they're just waiting for the government to basically mess it up, so then the elections happen, and then again they might get the 2/3 in the parliament, and then we will have sort of similar to Vučić scenario in which we have one party sort of taking it all. So it's not about Hoti, it's about the way Hoti has been sort of put into that position, and the way Hoti was never part of the process. It was Issa Mustafa from his party, but not him. Hoti is talking about having this national coordinator for the dialogue, and talking about the technical dialogue, which for Kosovo is not something that, worked well, and we don't really opt for it. And at this point, Hoti is keeping the dialogue within his circle, even within LDK, and not just the government. But it's so lacking transparency, and I think all of this is because his lack of really strategy on how to go back to the negotiating table, or like he doesn't trust anybody to actually go through with it. So we are in a very sensitive position in which we just had elections, but parties like Vedventos and sometimes PDK are asking for new elections. And the EU is talking about an 18 months process, which I believe will become even harder because of the presidential elections in Serbia. So at this point, it's not just about the power balance on the table, but it's about how Hoti is being seen internally, then of course externally.
Thank you, Donika. And what Donika says, what Prime Minister Hoti is hoping for, if there would be a deal at one point, is a 2/3 majority, is something that President Vučić and his party already have in the parliament. And many of the observers, including myself, before I talked to Djordje, thought that, now President Vučić has all the power that he needs, and there is no excuses anymore for him to reject. But there is a catch in it that Djordje knows more about it. So can you basically tell us about how concentrated the power is on the Kosovo issue in President Vučić?
So, thank you, Adi. I think this is really crucial to understand when it comes to Serbia. So Vučić, not only did he got 2/3 in the elections, 60-something%, he got 180 MPs, and you need 166 or 67 to amend the constitution, to vote the new constitution, the whole parts of constitution. Of course, there are parts of constitution for which, besides the 2/3 majority in the parliament, you would need a referendum, and those are the parts that relate to Kosovo in Serbian constitution, namely the preamble and the Article 182. But I think that, of course, on one side, Vučić's legitimacy is contested. On one side, opposition boycotted the elections. On the other side, the overall authoritarianism in Serbia. And I think it, of course, questions how Vučić's power is legitimate. But on the other side, I think if he ever has the possibility to strike a deal with Kosovo and to survive it politically, which I think it's crucial for him, that's now. He has the presidential elections in 2022. I'm not sure whether he's going to calculate to do it before or afterwards. The new government is just about to be formed, SNS-led government that is going to last for probably 4 years. So I think if he has a comfortable position at home not to have an excuse saying, look, they are going to oppose that in the parliament, he won't, in essence, have any opposition in the parliament. The main opposition in Serbia are going to be, unfortunately, civil society organizations and independent media. I'm not having anything against them. I'm just saying that for a democratic plurality in a country, you need a proper opposition, and that in the upcoming 4 years you won't have in Serbia. So I think that if he calculates that he can politically survive the agreement with Kosovo, Vučić is going to do it. It's literally now or never in the upcoming. I would bet on 2 years, but it's more 4 years. Of course, with all the reservations, as Donika said, the process is not inclusive, and I think it goes for both sides. I will just mention the example of Kosovo Serbs who are left from both Belgrade and Prishtina in negotiations, and then no one actually takes into account of that community whose stakes are in the dialogue. What do you want from the dialogue? what's your stake in the dialogue. On one side, Vučić abuses the position of Srpska lista, both within Kosovo system and to have a claim, you know, I have Srpska lista and they tell me what to do on behalf of Kosovo Serbs. On the other side, we have also Kosovo that does not take into account the interest of, if I may say, the interest of its own citizens. So I think that the process is not inclusive, the process is not also transparent. I mean, we talked before how the process is not transparent on the Serbian side. We have never seen the official platform, nor we know who negotiates on our behalf besides Vučić. The technical level, the so-called technical level negotiations, even though I think that nothing is technical at this point, are going to start again this week. We don't know who negotiates. We don't know what exactly is on the table now. When the EU is facilitated, the process is more transparent. So we knew that it was missing persons. Missing persons and economy as the first two topics, but yet economy is so broad that it can be anything. So I really think that if we want to make the process, that is any agreement that is going to be implemented, it has to be digested. It has to be accepted to a certain level on the grassroots level in both Kosovo and Serbia. And then if you don't make the process inclusive and transparent, you're not going to get anywhere. But on the other side, when it comes to Vučić's position, I think that what goes in his hand is this massive support that he has got. On the other side, opposition who does not have to offer anything when it comes to Kosovo talks, which is unfortunate because we have the opposition who is either let's keep the status quo and discuss something else. And I really believe that it's of utmost importance for both Kosovo and Serbia to have a deal as soon as possible. For both societies to go further, it's of utmost importance to have a deal. And we actually often neglect that part, even though we just say in general it's important to have a deal. But if you have looked, and I come back to my previous point about the protests now in July in Belgrade, which were designed by someone as extreme right. I think that the Kosovo topic that was brought by Vučić again in 2017, 2018, and it's again topic number one in the Serbian society, it is pushing the society to the right. And we don't have a viable left or social democratic or green or anything similar. It has shrunk to 20%. 80% of a political spectrum in Serbia is right. Center right, extreme right, and so forth. On the other side, you have a frustration sort of in Kosovo of not having the possibility to travel to Europe like anyone else in Europe, or to having to deal with Serbia still in 2020. So I think for both societies, it's really crucial to have the agreement as soon as possible, and it's just not another phrase or another floskul. And I think that on the Serbian side, it can be actually now the moment.
Thank you, Djordje. Now I will ask you one question, and please make it very short answer if it's possible, 1 minute to 1 minute 30 seconds. The question is on the content of the dialogue, of the restarted dialogue. We've heard that the two topics discussed with Mr. Lajčák were economy and the missing people. Do you have any thoughts on the content that was presented, and on what next should or could or is coming on the agenda between the two sides? And Donika, for you, maybe a special question is, I've noticed that a lot of people in Kosovo have something, let's say, against the resumption of technical dialogue. If you could explain that as well in 90 seconds.
That's very hard. I will be very fast. It's first, there is nothing technical, as Djordje said, and I completely agree with him. We can, it's still political because it's being negotiated between two countries that actually have fundamental problems with each other. So us not being recognized by Serbia is the key problem, and then other issues can be sort of regulated on bilateral level. What is important now is just that we were against something that was a quick fix, something that came from what we thought was coming from the Ambassador Grenell and the White House, and then try to find a balance in between some of quick fix and another decade of technical process dragging feet and failing at the end. So we are not really afraid of the technical issues. We are afraid of another 10 years did, and with the parties and further legitimizing authoritarian regimes in both countries. So it's not about the content, it's about calling it technical, which then also sends messages that the EU is not ready and doesn't have the political power to push for serious issues. Sort of wrapping it with something that is called technical means that the EU either does not have the political power to do so, or is not ready, because it's like Finding Nemo, wanting something so bad. In the past 2 years, they have been wanting so bad to regain the role of leading the dialogue, and then when it happened, they went like, now what? And because it's simply sending messages of lacking political power. It doesn't matter what is being discussed. I believe that we should go and discuss on higher levels about the status of Kosovo and of course about the final deal, but then support it with a lot of other segments. And it's not just economy and missing people, but it's also other issues that are pressing and should be regulated between Kosovo and Serbia. What is important now is to create this stamina, to really prepare people, because they just can't wait to get rid of it. Well, I understand the frustration, but it's not that easy. If we go back to zero, then we should create the stamina. So we are basically ready for a long process, which is super demanding and requires engagement of all actors and segments. Sorry for.
No. Can I stay then with you? Because my second question, and then I'll go to Djordje, would be about Mr. Lajčák and the EU, because we discussed everything except that part. What is his power? Very often we can hear the power of the EU as a mediator. A mediator is the fact EU membership, or let's say visa liberalization for Kosovo. So what is the power that he could have as an offer for Kosovo side? Question for Donika. How is perception there?
Oh, yeah, about the perception. It was created by President Tashi, but also due to the fact that he was a foreign minister of a country that did not recognize Kosovo, and he didn't really, push towards any recognition. But of course, I have to mention that Slovakia is a country that highly supports Kosovo, and the EU integration path and the bilateral cooperation is quite solid in spite of not being recognized formally by Slovakia. But the discourse created by the President Tashi sent messages that whatever that is led by Lajčák is problematic, because first, he failed in Bosnia. This is how it's portrayed in Kosovo. Second, he comes from a non-recognizing country. And third, he is appointed by the EU, but he is part of the External Action Service. And to be honest, External Action Service is, it's political power is questioned even within the EU and not outside of it as well. So basically, he doesn't come with the political power that the member states have, especially France and Germany. But
could him negotiating or being an actor in visa liberalization part change that perception?
Definitely, that was my next point.
Okay.
The EU and what I didn't like about Lajčák, I'm starting from the negative, but I kind of, I attended one of his public events, so I'm not citing anything that is, closed Chatham House rules, is that he considered visa liberalization a bilateral issue for Kosovo, something that Kosovo has to sort of, lobby on its own, and is something that, they know where the problem is and they should fix it. And this is the approach that the Kosovars don't want to hear, because it's not about the visa liberalization process per se. Of course it is, because it's a fundamental right and we have fulfilled the requirements. But it's also showing that the EU is weak enough not to deliver or guarantee on something so technical that is called visa liberalization. And then, something, when we asked him about the non-recognizers, he also was, very, of course, I understand the limitations, but he didn't send, strong political messages that the EU will be at least engaged proactively to fix something, to reach a compromise in this regard. So he initially sent two very, very weak messages, something that visa liberalization can happen, and that's why Grenell is using it against him, because he constantly tweets that you should deliver on visa liberalization, and this is how he tests the political power of the EU. And second, what about the non-recognizers? If Kosovo doesn't really get that, then the EU perspective does not exist. So this is why it's a bit skeptical, his position, but I think the engagement of France and Germany are sort of balancing this, at least for the Kosovo side.
Thank you, Donika. Great. Djordje, to you, two questions on content. And the second question is question that we have all been asked in many informal and formal meetings is what does the EU have as an offer for Vučić/Serbia?
I think that both questions are actually equally important and super important in the context of the dialogue. The first one is that we don't actually know. I know how it functions from the technical side is that both sides have to agree on the topic in order to nominate it, to put it on the table. So unless both sides agree on, say, property, it won't be in Brussels at the negotiating table. It was recently published by Kosovo Democratic Institute, something from late 2018, early 2019, some topics that were agreed to be on the table, but these are the usual suspects, I would say. It's the question of property, it's the question of energy, cultural heritage protection, or the implementation of the so far reached agreements within the Brussels dialogue. So I think that these 4 or 5 topics are the main topics that are going to be on the table in the upcoming period of both technical and political, even though as Donika and I agree on that everything is very political in the whole process. So I think that's something that we are going to see in the upcoming period. And then the second question is for me crucial to answer whether and when and if Vučić is going to strike a deal. It's the answer to the question that many in Belgrade ask, what does Serbia have from this? What is the gain for Serbia in the negotiations? And then I think that what he tried in 2018, wrongly, to present the gain as the partition of Kosovo, and we are going to get 2 meters in north of Kosovo or whatever, as he presented as the gain. Thinking just of territory is inherently wrong approach, but nevertheless, that was something how he tried to sell it politically back in 2018. Now it remains to be seen what is the political gain, and I think that they are going to now go back to the first approach, which was Zajednica approach, the Association of Serbian Municipalities, which sort of became the boogeyman of the dialogue. And I think it's with no reason. I think that it is important to ensure the institutional safeguards for minority rights in Kosovo, and it's debatable whether the Ahtisaari framework is sufficient or not. But I think that there is not much that can be get on the Serbian side, and I think as soon as they get. And the second thing that they aim is which won't function in practice, is that they gave us strong guarantees that Serbia will be the member of the EU. I think that there is no such a thing, at least in the 70 years of European integration, that there were strong guarantees that a member will become a member of the EU. So I don't see what that can be on the plate that Vučić can digest and say, yes, this is sufficient so that I sign the deal.
So now, thank you, Djordje and Donika. Now I have a bit of a questions both via Facebook and in our Q&A and the chat atmosphere. So I'll be going from different, bit more mixed. Donika, question for you: is China playing any role in Kosovo at the moment, and do you see it increasing in the future? And what do you think would change if Vice President Biden would be elected president of the US? And the third question, what's the perception among population about the dialogue at the moment? And has it changed during COVID-19? I think that what happened in the past couple of days with Dua Lipa and some other things, a lot of people are asking about the nationalism and discussing whether what she did was nationalism or not. So there is this interest in that segment among our viewers. So those would be the 3 questions for you, Donika.
Okay, well, I'll start with China. The role of China in Kosovo is like very, very insignificant, and I think it's mostly because we are not recognized by China, so we haven't really been part of their projects in the Western Balkans. But I think it's also because there is no interest, because Kosovo is small, so economically it's not a big market, and doesn't have the EU perspective, not as much as Serbia, for instance, or even Montenegro. So basically, they are going for countries that have more EU, like perspective or are more likely to join the EU soon, and Kosovo definitely does not belong there, and also Bosnia, Adi. So we are the laggards, and that's why probably China is not as interested in Kosovo as it is in other regional countries. But this might change if, in the case the final agreement goes back to the UN Security Council, and of course they have the Taiwan issue and they have a lot of other issues that they can use Kosovo as a bargaining chip with the US. I mean, this is something that is very likely to happen and something that is not being discussed so far. We highly talk about Putin, what Putin is going to do, how Russia is going to act, but we sort of forgot that China has a veto power too, and China has a lot of issues that they can use Kosovo as a bargaining chip. Going to the second question, Biden for president, this is basically what we hoped for. I mean, there were a lot of theories, a lot of people thinking that let's drag our feet as much as we can until November, hoping for a change. I mean, still we don't know if that change is going to happen, because I mean, the American voters, after how they acted in response to COVID-19 in general, doesn't say that they have become brighter in the meantime, and a lot of economic issues are happening, and internal issues in the US, and this might change the way the people vote. We are hoping that Biden will take over and things will change. I mean, we know this historic and traditional Biden sort of connection that he has with Kosovo, and we vividly remember his last visit here. But there is one issue that he has a lot of things to fix. If he takes over the office, he has to deal with all the problems that Trump has caused in the past 4 years, which is a lot, and it starts with the EU, but also all other global issues. And I don't think he will have his attention will go fully to Kosovo issue. But what we expect from him is to sort of align with the EU in relation to Kosovo and jointly give it a last push. On the perception of the dialogue, I mean, it was generally sort of unpopular issue, to be honest. In the beginning, it was hopeful. I mean, it was very hard for me to see, as a person who has conducted field research in this regard, to see that people were more hopeful of the process in the beginning when it started than there are now, and this is something sad, because we missed a lot of momentums throughout the way. It was negative mostly, but also related to the role of President Taci and the territorial exchange. People are aware that dialogue is something that should happen, and something that Kosovo should go through with, and they are just hopeful that the political circumstances globally, but also regional level and internally, will change, and they will find a favorable moment to sign a deal. It hasn't. I mean, nationalism, it's always a thing. It's always a card that our political elites have been using traditionally to sort of manipulate the masses. And of course, during the COVID-19 crisis, this has, of course, increased, because also this isolation that took place, but also the way the countries have interacted in the Balkans with each other. I mean, I'm not just talking about the Kosovo-Serbia issue, but we haven't had also good relations with Albania in the past 3 months. And we hardly cooperated with Albania in response to COVID. And of course, I mean, nationalism and what happened on Twitter with Dua Lipa was something very interesting, because she posted the map, and it I think came as a result, as a reaction to Apple sort of deleting the border between Kosovo and Serbia, although it's a dotted line and it's not an actual border, it's an administrative border. And then her reaction was unexpected, to be honest, but then it was more unexpected and surprising for me how the academic circles reacted to her tweet, and then how it contributed to the nationalist literature and research in the Balkans. I mean, every country in the Balkans has a greater version of itself, and we don't don't like that, and I don't think that's something that we would opt for, especially now. It was like something that she did. She's a pop artist. She doesn't represent any country, to be honest. She lives in London, and of course it fueled nationalism here in Kosovo, and it's very interesting to see how the mass reacted towards it, and they even like claiming that our politicians are not as nationalist as our post, which was somehow I think perceived that way, and then even blaming the politicians for not having the guts to be as vocal as she is. So it's very interesting what is happening now in Kosovo.
Thanks, Donika. Every country except Bosnia. Bosnia only has smaller versions of it. So,
Sorry.
Djordje, which is not, Djordje, question for you is similar. Biden, what's the population perception of the dialogue at the moment? Has it changed because of COVID and because of other developments? And the third question, which is special for you, is whether the protests, taking into account part of the symbolics that was used during the recent protests, whether if there would be a signing of agreement and independent Kosovo recognized, would we be seeing more of a violent protest in Serbia and throughout Serbia?
I'll start with that because I think it's the most pertinent one when it comes to the situation in Serbia. I think that with the current control, with the current power, with the current state capture that is in place in Serbia, if SNS, let's not use the name as Donika suggested, but in this case, truly, if Vučić decides that the deal is going to be passed, the media, the political resources, and all other state resources are going to be used to get the deal through. And I think that in this case, we had also the assumption that it was also state-driven, the hooligans and the groups to be in the protest just to delegitimize them, to say, hey, these are violent, we are not going to support them, which can also be a state strategy. So I think that, of course, it will depend whether the ruling party decides we want to deal with Kosovo. I think it's very much comparable with all the other political processes. It was the same let me give the example of Belgrade Pride, when we had hooligans on the years for 3 years and it was banned in 2014. The state decided, okay, we are keeping hooligans away, and then since then we have the peaceful protest. I think that maybe it's not comparable, but I think that it very much shows what's the strength of the state when it comes to the control, and I think it can very much go in line. Of course, there might be some protest, but I think that if the states decide, then that is going to be done through. Quickly on Biden and that's also the perception of the dialogue. I think I replied in a bit. The perception is, yes, it's unfair and stuff, but I think that it's more of what the media, the propaganda that is used by the regime to get things through. Biden, my main question is whether, if Biden wins, of course, whether things would go to pre-2016 phase when it comes to transatlantic cooperation. And I think there, of course, many things would be improved in a better way when it comes to the communication between Europe and the US. But the main question, can everything be fixed what has been disrupted since 2016? And that's my main concern. And the second, of course, how highly on the list of priorities Serbia and Kosovo is going to be, but definitely way better than with the current administration, because what we are witnessing and what we are going to see, I think, if Trump wins the second mandate, is Richard Grenell as Secretary of State, and he desperately needed one foreign policy success. So I think that pretty much fits the puzzle.
Thank you, Djordje. Thank you, Donika. My last question was supposed to be for you. What is it that we as individuals, as members of civil society, as younger researchers and humans can do at this moment, in next weeks, in next months, to make sure that there is a deal at the end of this road, and that it's sooner rather than later, and that is better quality than of a worse quality? And that question was to extent motivated by an article that was published by Agon Marici for Kosev, where he answered to a question posed by, I would say, journalists from northern Kosovo, from a Serb community, of why does Kosovo and Metohija name offends him and Albanians in Kosovo. And I think basically motivated by that article, which I think is a is an interesting way to start a debate where we ask questions each other and listen to the answers that we'll give. I will leave that answer unanswered at the moment, but I'm sure that in coming weeks and coming months, we actually, through this initiative, will do more of these and similar concrete things. On behalf of organizers, all three of them, the International Institute for Peace, the Austrian Institute for International Relations, and the Karl Renner Institute, I thank both of our panelists, Donika Emini and Djordje Bojović, and I thank all the people that have joined us. And just as information, this video will also be available online, so you can share it with your colleagues and friends that you believe could be useful to watch. And greetings to everyone, and see you at our next event. And stay posted on the things that we will produce as part of this network. All the best.